These newspaper article readings are not for the faint-hearted or the squeamish. If you're at all sensitive, I might suggest these aren't for you. If in doubt, check the description below. It'll tell you which topics are covered in this particular episode. There's both human and animal suicides, and you heard that right. There's also horrific descriptions of injuries, as well as the deaths of youngsters. So don't do it to yourself if you're prone to nightmares, is all I'll say right now. Not all the articles are horrible. Some of them are uplifting, some of them show incredible bravery and heroism. There are near misses. So these were picked as showing life prior to health and safety, as well as for the crazy and curious details some contain with other miscellaneous happenings that kind of struck me enough to post the articles to Twitter, despite not having too much relevance to Scotland necessarily. These are worldwide topics, and they didn't have any real connection to the projects that I was working on and researching at the time. I just happened to have come across them by the way, kind of thing. So we'll get into them, shall we? What we're going to do here is we're going to do a lucky dip of newspaper articles to really mix them up a wee bit, because while I'm doing the researches, I'm obviously coming up with the same kind of terms and things. So we'll mix them up even further. So to that end, I have all of the newspaper titles and dates of the articles. Let's see what the hat has for us this episode. We're starting with the Airdrie Coatbridge Advertiser for the 5th of October 1907. Okay, this is an interesting one. We're not starting with a short article here. It's entitled Hairbreadth Escapes. There is a Swiss workman who tells an astonishing story of a close call, and one which has the merit of being perfectly true. One day in November 1901, he was busy repairing the roof of a small railway station near Interlaken when the cleat on which he was resting broke away, and he found himself sliding helplessly downwards. Exactly below him was an iron railing, and to avoid being impaled upon the spikes which topped it, the man, as he reached the edge, made a desperate jump. At this very moment, an express train came rushing through the station, and the man landed square on the roof of a carriage. Clinging like grim death to the ventilator chimney, he was carried on to the next station, 4 miles away, where the train stopped. There he was held down, and found to be none the worse except for a shaking. All those who work upon railways are liable to find themselves in tight places, but a tighter can hardly be conceived than, when speeding down a mountain railway on a handcar at 30 miles an hour, to suddenly become aware that a special is panting upwards around the curve in front. This was the actual predicament in which a party of 4 platelayers found themselves upon the Marias Pass, by which the Great Northern Railway of America climbs the Rockies. There was no time to pull up, no possibility of stopping the advancing train. The only alternative was to jump. 2 of the men did so. The line here runs along a mere ledge cut in the mountainside. Both the unfortunate fellows crashed to their death among the rocks below. Of the 2 who stuck to the car, one was crushed to a pulp under the wheels of the oncoming engine. The other, in some extraordinary fashion, was flung quite 10 feet into the air. He described a wide curve and pitched unhurt into a clump of bushes which grew on a projecting rock about 20 feet below the edge of the cliff. It was just the one possible place where he could have fallen safely. A yard either way, and he would have dropped into the rock-strewn bed of the river, which brawled nearly 100 feet below. Level crossings are more common in the United States than in this country, and form a frequent cause of accident. In August 1906, a New York lawyer, Conklin by name, was in the act of driving his motor over one of these crossings near Orangeburg, when an express dashed up at nearly 60 miles an hour. Mr. Conklin put on speed, but it was too late. The locomotive struck the car and sent it whirling in a fountain of splinters. People rushed to the rescue and began hunting for the unfortunate victim's body. They could not find it. The train had been brought to a standstill and passengers joined in the search, but not a trace of the motor's driver could be found. At last, it occurred to the engine driver to walk round his engine. There was Mr. Conklin stretched on the little platform above the cow-catcher. He was stunned and had several ribs broken, but he has since recovered, and is perhaps the only man alive who can boast of having survived a collision with an express train running at full speed. While Mr. Conklin lay in hospital recovering from his injuries, another accident occurred in the near neighbourhood of New York. A small steam yacht with a cheery pleasure party aboard was steaming out to sea when she was run down and capsized by a string of refuse scows, which were being towed back into the harbour. Of the 8 aboard the yacht, 4 clung to the keel of their vessel and were picked up. The others sank and vanished from sight. Among the latter was a Miss Fanny Day, and it was the sad duty of the rescued to go and inform her family of her death. Imagine, if you can, the utter amazement of the messengers when they were received by Miss Day herself, alive and well. Her escape is one of the most extraordinary upon record. When the yacht turned over, the girl was drawn by suction right underneath the barge that had run them down. She did not lose consciousness, but rose again, only to strike her head against something hard. Realizing that she was still underneath the scow and with breath fast failing, she gave herself up for lost. Suddenly she was shot upwards and found herself out of water, but in pitch darkness. Something touched her face. She grasped it and found it was a chain, to which she clung desperately. As soon as she could get breath, she screamed vigorously, and suddenly a great lid above her was lifted, and 2 men pulled her up into the light of day. What had happened was this. A load of garbage had just been dumped through the bottom of the barge at the moment of the collision, and when Miss Day rose through the water, she had providentially struck the trap, which was still open. This closed behind, leaving her in the hold of the scow, imprisoned in inky darkness and indescribable filth, but quite safe and unhurt. All the other 3 who sank with her were drowned, and their bodies were not recovered till long afterwards. And that's from the Airdrie and Coatbridge Advertiser for the 5th of October, 1907. And what a run of near misses, mind you. As we saw, not everyone managed to survive these incidents, but those are some crazy escapes that deserved reporting. I like that collection. Yeah, that's overall a fairly positive article. I'll have a next. We have The Scotsman for the 29th of July, 1907. Okay, we've a couple of articles here. First, a shocking accident. A terrible fatality occurred on Saturday morning at Carbrook Steelworks, Sheffield. Harry Midgley, a fitter, was at work when he became entangled in revolving shafting. He was carried round at a terrific rate, and ultimately his head was whirled against the wall with such force that the skull was smashed to fragments. Next, we have a fatal accident on a colliery railway. A fatal accident occurred on Terpentways Colliery Line, Pontnewood, Monmouthshire, early on Saturday morning. Some carriages belonging to a workman's train starting from the colliery were boarded by men leaving after night work. When the engine was being attached, the cars started, and a married man named George Baldwin, who jumped to save himself, fell back on the permanent way and was dragged about 200 yards. He was picked up dead. The carriages were stopped before further harm had been done. They're not positive articles. The first, I can only assume that health and safety regulations would have maybe prevented that accident. That's just a horrible accident, the first one. The second, I'll apologise now for my pronunciation of Welsh town names, but being dragged 200 yards. It's just so scary for the victim. He'll have known what was happening to begin with. And I guess we can only hope it was over quickly for him. Is it because the train started too quickly? It says that it's when the engine was being attached the cars started. So maybe they weren't fully prepared before getting going, and that's what's caused this accident. He'd obviously felt like he needed to jump to save himself, and unfortunately that didn't work out for him. We'll have another one. This is the Aberdeen Press and Journal for the 16th of October 1907. Let's see what this says. Okay, this one will end us because it's a fairly long wee list. It gives us some previous railway disasters. The following are a few of the more striking disasters on British railways since 1880. On June 18th, 1880, the engine of the Flying Scotsman ran off the line 2 or 3 miles north of Berwick. The carriages were precipitated down an embankment. There were few passengers on the train, and only the guard, the driver, and the fireman were killed. October 9th, 1880, near Leicester, the Midland Scottish Express, owing to a mistake of the driver, collided with an advancing train. Several persons were severely injured. December 24th, 1881, at Slough on the Great Western Railway, an express ran into a goods train. 12 persons were killed. November 15th, 1884, near Penistone on the Manchester, Sheffield and Lincolnshire Railway, an express travelling at the rate of 55 miles an hour was wrecked over an embankment owing to an axle breaking. There were 16 deaths. November 15th, 1887, near Doncaster, a Manchester and Sheffield train ran into a Midland excursion train. 25 persons were killed. June 12th, 1889, 2 Sunday Scholars trains collided near Armagh on the Great North of Ireland Railway. 80 persons were killed, 400 injured. March 4th, 1890, the Scottish Express ran into an engine at Carlisle Station. There were 4 deaths. November 22nd, 1890, the Great Western Express was in collision near Taunton. 10 persons were killed. November 2nd, 1892, the Northeastern Scottish Express ran into a goods train near Thirsk. The wreckage took fire and 10 persons were killed. August 12th, 1893, on the Taff Vale Railway near Treforest Station, part of a train went over an embankment. There were 2 deaths. August 12th, 1894, The Scottish Express was wrecked at St Pancras Station owing to the failure of the brakes. 21 persons were injured. October 4th, 1894, the North Eastern Scottish Express was in collision with a coal train near Northallerton. The driver was killed. December 22nd, 1894, in a violent gale, an express train ran into a coal wagon near Dunbar. 1 person was killed. July 15th, 1903, a train conveying an excursion party from the Isle of Man ran into the buffers at St Enoch's Station, Glasgow. There were 16 deaths and 30 persons were injured. January 1905, the Midland Scottish Express dashed into an unrailed goods train near Cudworth. 6 persons were killed, including Mr Robert Brow, ARSA, Aberdeen, and 13 were injured. July 1st, 1906, an express train conveying passengers of the Atlantic liner New York from Plymouth to London was wrecked near Salisbury. 27 persons were killed and 8 injured. December 28th, 1906, an Edinburgh to Aberdeen North British passenger train dashed into a local train at Elliot Junction on the Dundee and Arbroath Joint Railway. 22 persons were killed, including Mr A. W. Black, MP for Banffshire, and many were injured. And that final article is from the Aberdeen Press and Journal for the 16th of October 1907. The accident for July 15th, 1903 was included in Volume 1 of our Railway Incidents publication. And the posts on the site, that was the St Enoch Station crash where excursionists were caught up. And the second that I know of well is the December 28th, 1906 accident at Elliot Junction. That's made it into Volume 2 of the Railway Incidents, which will be published just shortly. And I actually obtained a photograph postcard that depicted part of that scene of the Elliot Junction crash, and it was just terrible. Yeah, it just took so long for regulations to come in, just decades and decades for regulations to come in on the railways to help prevent injuries and deaths to both staff and passengers. It just took too long. It was the expenditure of money. These were private companies that did not want to have to spend the money. There's a lesson in there somewhere. So that's us for this episode, and we may see you next time. Take care.